our focus maybe to West Africa instead, where we have seen some of the most inspiring political developments on the African continent. Now, the challenge is to ensure that people have access to economic and social opportunities. For more on the recent political developments in West Africa, I'm joined by Ronak Gopaldas, country risk analyst at RMB. Ronak, thank you so much for joining us. I perhaps want to start off in Nigeria, where we saw about 2 weeks ago the splitting of the PDP. Has this had, or does it have any economic implications?
That's definitely the case. I think the political temperature is heating up quite substantially in Nigeria, and that's close on 2 years before the election even happens. So I think, you know, what the recent developments mean, both in terms of the PDP split as well as the consolidation of the opposition, what that really means is that you know, the economic reform agenda, which has been pushed by the Jonathan administration, is now on the back burner, and that's lost a lot of reform. So, and then going forward, you know, what we're likely to see in the run-up to the elections is fiscal slippage. We're going to see key reforms like the petroleum industry bill not happening, and really there's going to be a rise in uncertainty, which investors really don't like.
I mean, to a large extent, one is tempted to make a comparison with the South African context, where we've seen the ruling party, the African National Congress, also undergoing some factioning and split-offs. Now, how significant is the factions that we're seeing in the PDP? Is this big enough to call into question President Jonathan's ambitions to clinch another term in 2015?
So the thing about Goodluck Jonathan right now is that he's extremely unpopular, both within his party and outside his party. And I think what the recent PDP split means is essentially it's a preemptive strike. Because if the northern governors who broke away wait until the PDP primaries, you know, the election machinery and the patronage networks and the power of incumbency that Jonathan has at his disposal will likely deliver him the victory. So whether they're serious and about the longer term split in the PDP, you know, that's a matter of debate. Whether they have the staying power is debatable. But I think, you know, it could be a way of extracting some kind of concessions or getting President Jonathan to step aside in favor of a northern candidate.
Let's quickly turn our focus to Mali. Now, one of the really interesting things about that particular election, which concluded a few weeks ago as well, was the fact that it was tied to almost $4 billion of aid. Now, are we seeing that aid being unlocked, and which sectors are top of the list to actually receive these funds? Yeah,
I mean, as you mentioned, the aid was a prerequisite on a successful, credible, peaceful election, and that's happened. And I think given where Mali was a year ago and where they've come to, I think that's a substantial improvement, and it augurs well for the country. In addition to that, you've had the UN peacekeeping forces enter the country on July 1, which will lend to the stability that we're currently seeing. The administration, you know, in terms of economic priorities, the president has appointed a highly technocratic government with the prime minister being an ex-banker.
Right.
In addition to that, you know, I think there's a firm grasp of what the key issues are. Reconciliation has been prioritized, and inclusive government in Mali has been prioritized. You're seeing, you know, people or politicians from across the political spectrum being included in the government, and I think that speaks to you know, a realization of some of the key challenges that the country faces. It won't be an overnight process, but I do think that where the country is now is definitely an improvement on 12 months ago, and you know, it can only build from here on.
Of course, Ronak, I mean, if one looks at the candidates that were actually running against President Keita, 22 of those 25 candidates have come out openly, they've endorsed the elections and openly supported the new presidency. Should this be understood to be a new era of not only political but economic stability for Mali as well, in light of how they've come out in their support?
I think it's far too early to make that claim. I think it's definitely a positive step. You know, it shows an element of political maturity. But you know, political and military institutions and structures broke down with the coup attempt last year. You know, the Islamic insurgency with the Tuareg group in the north exposed a lot of problems. And I think, you know, whilst consensus building is important in Mali, it will take a lot of work to restore the credibility of these institutions in the country.
Of course, another country in the west of the continent has shown some degree of political maturity is Ghana. We've seen finally the Supreme Court's ruling coming and upholding that decision that saw President John Mahama's win. Now, and we've seen the candidates that were opposing it concede defeat. How important is this now for the economic road ahead for this country?
So yeah, the ruling is not really a surprise. We kind of expected it. There was no violence around the outcome. The protest was done in the court as opposed to the streets. And it really is testament to Ghana's democratic credentials, its institutional capacity, and the transparency and the independence with which the judiciary conducted itself. So politically, a big tick there, definite positive development. The verdict, what it does now is it draws a line in the sand. It closes the matter, and I think both the opposition and the ruling party had been distracted in kind of the first 8 months of the year, and now they really need to shift their focus to getting the country's public affairs and public finances, for that matter, in order, because they had a massive deficit last year, 12% of GDP. And the economic issues are more pressing, and now one just hopes that the politicians will focus their efforts towards the economic agenda.